If you think madness has a limit, think again. Speaking of which, you probably haven't heard of one of the deadliest cults in modern history, the Ant Kids. This cult was not just about strange beliefs or odd rituals. It was purely about horror, suffering, and brutality, far beyond what most of us could ever imagine. I'd like to take a moment just to pose this situation to you. Imagine you're a follower in this group and you're faced with two choices. Option 1, break your own leg with a sledgehammer. Or option 2, be sent straight to hell. I don't know about you guys, but I'll take my chances with the latter. And unfortunately, believe it or not, breaking your own leg with a sledgehammer was just the beginning. And at the center of this twisted cult stood its leader, Roch Thériault. I honestly don't care if I mispronounce that, because the dude, frankly, he's a monster. He was a man who claimed to be a prophet, but had a strange obsession with anatomy and medicine, but not in the way you'd expect. He would slice open the stomachs of his followers with no anesthesia and tear out part of their intestines with his bare hands. Kind of like having the world's worst healthcare, but I mean, at least it's free. Of course, many of his victims didn't survive. They would die in sheer agony, but death didn't mean the suffering was over. If you died under Thériault's watch, he had even more grotesque plans. He would saw off the top of the dead body's head, sexually assault the corpse, and before burying the body, he would remove a rib. And that rib, he would keep as a trophy, hanging it around his neck like a sick, twisted necklace. So the question now is, how did this all begin? How does a man go from a quiet upbringing to leading one of the deadliest cults the world has ever seen? And how could so many people fall under the spell of someone so terrifying? This is the story of the Ant Kids, one of the most dangerous and brutal cults in modern history. A cult where followers were pushed to their limits, and the line between faith and horror blurred beyond comprehension. Roch Thériault's story starts long before the Ant Kids cult. It begins in the quiet towns of Quebec, where a young boy became obsessed with something most children his age don't even think about, that being the end of the world. While others played, Roch spent his time reading the Bible, particularly the book of Revelation. This wasn't just a passing interest, it was an obsession. The idea of God's wrath, the apocalypse, and the judgment day seemed to pull him in, shaping his thoughts in a way that would soon take him down a dark rabbit hole. If only someone had given him a Dr. Seuss book or something, things may have turned out differently. And this obsession didn't come out of nowhere. Roch's childhood was far from peaceful. His home life was harsh, with stories of his father being abusive. One disturbing memory sticks out: the bone game. And no, it's probably not what you're thinking. Roch and his father would sit across from each other, kicking each other under the table with steel-toed boots until one of them gave up. It wasn't just a game, it was cruelty disguised as bonding. And this constant tension at home may have pushed Roch further into his fascination with religion, looking for some sort of escape. So we can say that his family's strict Catholic beliefs played a huge role in shaping his view of the world. His father was part of the White Berets, a radical Catholic group known for its extreme views. And religion was forced upon Roch at every turn. He was made to go door to door, spreading the group's message with his father, learning early on how to convince people to follow. But instead of drawing him closer to the Catholic faith, it did the opposite. It pushed him away, filling him with hatred for everything his family believed in. That hatred didn't mean he abandoned religion though. In fact, it only fueled his desire to create his own version, a version where he is in control. Thériault's obsession with the Bible grew, and now it just wasn't about learning, it was about power. He wanted to become the leader, the one that people turned to, just like the prophets he had read about in the Bible. And now, the next step in Roch's journey, unfortunately, was to gather followers, pulling them into his sick and twisted ideologies. Roch Thériault wasn't just a man obsessed with religion, he was a master of manipulation. As his obsession grew, so did his desire to gather people around him. He had a strange charm, the kind that made people feel like they were in the presence of someone special. He used that charm to his advantage, and soon enough, people started following him. One of the first was Giselle LaFrance. She believed in him completely, and it wasn't long before others did too. Unfortunately, in this case, unfollowing him wasn't just as easy as clicking that button online. Speaking of which, if you're enjoying the video, please support the channel, click the like button and subscribe. It all started when Thériault became involved with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. At first, he was just another follower, but that didn't last long. With his promises of health, salvation, and unity, he quickly gained attention. His followers believed that he had the power to heal, to lead them to a better life. They trusted him, and in return, he gave them hope. But that hope came with a dark price. As more people gathered around him, Thériault's control over them grew stronger. He wasn't just their leader, he was becoming their prophet. Then came the turning point, the vision that would change everything. During a retreat at Lake Rousseau, Thériault claimed to have seen a vision from God. He said the sky lit up with a bright white light, and a divine voice called upon him and told him that he was standing on sacred ground. That moment cemented his role as a self-proclaimed prophet. His followers believed that he had been chosen by God to guide them through the coming apocalypse. It wasn't even about faith anymore, it was about survival. With this newfound power, Thériault led his followers into the wilderness, where they would then isolate themselves from society. They proceeded to build their new commune in the remote hills, and they called it the Eternal Mountain. Thériault preached that only those who followed him would survive the end of times. At first, it seemed like a peaceful retreat, but soon his true nature began to show. He began enforcing strict rules, punishments, and brutal control. What started as a vision of unity quickly spiraled into a nightmare of fear and violence. As time passed, Thériault's control over his followers became absolute. What began as promises of salvation and healing quickly spread into a twisted world of fear and abuse. His followers were no longer free people. They were prisoners in a nightmare of Thériault's making. His behavior grew more erratic, and his punishments became even more severe. No one could escape his grasp. Thériault's manipulation went far beyond just emotional control. He forced marriages within the group, pairing followers together without their consent. These were not unions of love, but tools to maintain his power. He also controlled their food. He rationed it out so tightly that complaining about hunger led to even fewer rations. Followers who displeased him were subjected to physical punishments, including brutal beatings, and it didn't stop there. One of the most infamous examples of his cruelty was this twisted form of surgery. Thériault, with no medical knowledge, would claim to heal his followers by cutting open their bodies. In one instance, he amputated the toes of a follower as punishment. In another, he sliced open a follower's abdomen and ripped out a portion of their intestines without anesthesia, and had another follower sew the wound shut with a simple needle and thread. These so-called surgeries were nothing more than torture, a way for Thériault to exercise his dominance. So the next time you find yourself at a doctor, maybe be a little more grateful. But the darkest moment came with the death of Samuel, a 2-year-old boy in the commune. Samuel was beaten by another follower, Guy Veer. But instead of seeking proper medical help, Thériault attempted to fix the boy himself. The child died shortly after. And in a cruel and bizarre twist, Thériault tried to cover up the incident by performing a gruesome circumcision on the boy's lifeless body. As if that wasn't enough, he then convinced Veer to undergo castration, claiming it would cure his violent tendencies. The abuse had no boundaries. Thériault's control over his followers were strong, but even he couldn't control time. In 1979, he prophesied the world would end on February 17, 1979, with catastrophic events like earthquakes and fire raining down from the sky. And his followers believed him, trusting his every word. But when that day came and went, without so much as a tremor, something should have snapped. The world didn't end, but Thériault spun another lie, telling his followers that God operated on a different timeline, and in God's world, 1979 hadn't even arrived yet. And his followers' reaction, they believed him without question, worshiping him even more. Now, you might think that deep in the Canadian wilderness and later in the forests of Ontario, things might be calm and peaceful. Thériault, who had a terrifying hold over his followers, fathered 26 children with the women in the group. And just to put that into perspective, that's enough to fill up 2 Little League soccer teams, just from one guy. Most of these children, of course, were directly from abusing his women followers. Also, being a father pretty much meant nothing to him. As expected, the horrors simply didn't stop there. When Thériault was enraged, he became the surgeon of the group. Imagine trusting the people around you, only for them to hold you down, while Thériault used kitchen tools, pliers, and even blow torches on your body. Many of his followers left these brutal surgeries, permanently mutilated, missing fingers, toes, or even entire limbs. Thériault's punishments were straight out of a nightmare. He forced his followers to break their own legs, eat insects or feces, and endure unimaginable pain. Some even had their teeth or nails pulled out without even a warning. Others were sometimes forced to sit on a lit stove. His cruelty had no limits, and the suffering he caused seemed endless. As the time passed, the media began reporting on the strange activities of the anthill kids, and law enforcement couldn't ignore the growing concern any longer. Despite the failed prophecy, Thériault's behavior grew even more and more paranoid and cruel. He punished anyone that questioned him, and his punishments became more and more extreme. His increasing delusions led to one of the most tragic moments in the cult's history, the death of Solange Ballard. Solange was one of Thériault's most devoted followers, but when she fell ill, Thériault's twisted mind saw an opportunity. Claiming he could heal her, Thériault began to perform a brutal surgery with no medical tools or anesthesia. He sliced her open, removed part of her intestines with his bare hands, and had another follower stitch her back together. Solange didn't even survive the night, but Thériault didn't stop there. In a bizarre ritual, he convinced himself that he could bring her back to life. He exhumed her body, drilled a hole in her skull, and sexually assaulted the corpse, believing that this act could somehow revive her. As Thériault's madness deepened, some followers started to see the horror for what it was. One follower, Gabrielle, a longtime member of the cult, made the brave decision to escape. After enduring years of abuse, including having her own arm amputated by Thériault, she fled and sought for help. Her courage alone led to the unraveling of the Anthill Kids. With Gabrielle's testimony, the police finally had enough evidence to arrest Thériault and some of his loyal followers. When Roch Thériault was finally arrested in 1989, it marked the beginning of the end for one of the most deadliest cults in history. Thanks to the bravery of Gabrielle and the evidence she provided, the police had enough to charge Thériault and his followers. During the trial, the court heard horrifying stories of abuse, torture, and control. The gruesome details of Thériault's surgeries, the death of Solange, and the violence he inflicted on his followers shocked everyone. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence against him, some of his followers remained loyal to the man they had once called Moses, which is kind of an interesting name considering instead of separating the seas, he would separate intestines. In 1993, Thériault was sentenced to life in prison for the second-degree murder of Solange Ballard. But even behind bars, his hold on some of his followers didn't fully break. They continued to visit him, still trapped in the web of his manipulation. Thériault's parole requests were repeatedly denied, as the court deemed him far too dangerous to ever be freed. His control may have waned, but his delusions and twisted beliefs in his own divinity never left. Thériault's reign of terror finally came to an end in 2011, when he was found dead in his prison cell, the victim of another inmate's attack. The man who inflicted so much pain and suffering met a violent end himself, but even after his death, the scars of his actions remained, particularly for the survivors who had lived through the nightmare of the Anthill Kids cult. Gabrielle, who endured years and years of abuse and torture, emerged as a symbol of hope. After escaping the cult, Gabrielle rebuilt her life, turning her trauma into a message of hope and strength. Gabrielle soon became a motivational speaker, sharing her story with the world, convincing people that true happiness comes from peace within oneself. So, would you join the Anthill Kids cult? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And always remember, don't drink the Kool-Aid.